The small dusty village lay silent under the midday sun, its narrow dirt paths lined with crude wooden huts. Inside one of those huts, a young woman named Amina labored in agony, her body trembling from pain and exhaustion. She had given birth just hours before, and the cries of her newborn daughter were the only sound breaking the oppressive quiet. Her face was pale, streaked with tears and sweat, and her arms shook as she held the tiny infant close to her chest. Desperate to shield her from the harsh world outside, the villagers had long regarded Amina's family with suspicion, and the news of her daughter's birth was received with anger rather than joy. In this place, a girl was considered a burden, a disappointment to the lineage. Her husband, a brutish man named Farid, entered the hut, his expression dark with rage. He had wanted a son, someone to carry on his name, and the cries of a female child had ignited a fury that knew no mercy. Words were shouted, cruel accusations thrown across the room. And before Amina could even respond, the blows came. Pain tore through her body, not only from the beatings, but from the indignity of being punished for her child's very existence. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the rough straw floor, the infant still clutched against her chest. The baby cried, sensing the distress in her mother's every movement. Amina's mind raced, a mixture of terror and determination flooding her senses. She knew she could not remain here. The life of her daughter, fragile and new, depended on her survival. Tears blurred her vision as she struggled to her feet, blood and sweat mixing on her skin. She whispered promises to her baby, tiny words of hope that seemed almost absurd against the reality surrounding her. "I will protect you," she murmured, rocking the child gently. "I will keep you safe. No one will harm you as long as I am alive." The words were fragile yet resolute, a lifeline in the midst of despair. The villagers peered through gaps in the wooden walls. Curiosity mingled with judgment, yet no one intervened. Some looked away, unwilling to risk the wrath of Farid, while others muttered in disapproval, blaming Amina for the child she carried. The sense of isolation pressed down on her, suffocating and relentless. Yet within that isolation, a spark of determination ignited. She could not rely on anyone here. Survival and protection of her child rested solely on her shoulders. Night approached, bringing with it a chilling wind that seeped through the cracks of the hut. Farid, finally exhausted by his own rage, left, slamming the door behind him. Amina was left alone, her body bruised and aching, yet her mind sharpened by the urgency of her situation. She wrapped the baby tightly in a worn cloth, tucking her close to her chest to share warmth. Each movement was careful and deliberate. Every sound outside the hut made her flinch. As darkness settled, Amina realized that escape was no longer just a desire, it was a necessity. She could not stay another moment in the village that had become a prison of cruelty. She whispered once more to her daughter, a vow that would carry her through the coming trials. "We will leave. We will find safety. I promise." With that promise, she began to plan her perilous journey. The first steps toward freedom and hope for her child. Even as the shadows of the past still clung to her. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pale gold and soft pink. Amina moved quietly, careful not to wake the village that had been her prison. Every creak of the hut's floorboards made her flinch, but she forced herself to focus on the fragile bundle in her arms, her newborn daughter, safe for now. Still wrapped in the tattered cloth she had scavenged from home. With each step along the dusty paths, memories of the previous day's brutality clawed at her. She could still feel the sting of Farid's hands and hear the jeers of the villagers as they whispered that a girl was worthless. Her heart ached not only for herself but for the tiny life she had brought into a world that seemed determined to reject her. Every instinct screamed to run faster, to put as much distance as possible between her and the hut. between her and the violence that lingered like a shadow. The forest at the village's edge promised cover but was treacherous. Branches scratched at her face and arms, roots threatened to trip her weary legs, and the uneven terrain made carrying the infant a constant struggle. But Amina moved steadily, driven by a determination sharper than fear. Each step was a battle, not only against the physical obstacles, but against the despair threatening to consume her. She whispered gently to her daughter, her voice barely above a sigh, telling her that they would find safety, that the world could be kinder than the one they had left behind. As hours passed, hunger and fatigue gnawed at her. Her body, still recovering from childbirth, protested every movement, and yet she pushed on, refusing to succumb. She scavenged small roots and berries from the forest floor, careful to choose only those she recognized as safe. Occasionally, she paused to let the baby nurse, rocking her gently, singing soft, broken lullabies that barely carried through the dense trees. Each moment of peace reminded her of what she was fighting for. The forest, however, was not entirely safe. Distant animal calls and rustling leaves made her heart race. Every shadow seemed to hide danger, every sound a potential threat. She clutched the baby closer, murmuring reassurances to herself as much as to her daughter. The realization that they were utterly alone in this wilderness was sobering. There was no one to help if something went wrong. Yet the same realization strengthened her resolve. Her survival and her child's depended solely on her courage and resourcefulness. Night fell again, colder than before, and Amina found a small hollow beneath the roots of an ancient tree. She huddled there, drawing the baby close to her chest, trying to conserve warmth. Fatigue pressed on her eyelids, yet she dared not sleep fully. Every sound could be a predator or a wandering villager searching for her. Her mind raced with plans, possibilities, and fears, but through it all, she clung to one unwavering truth. She would not return to that village. By the time the second dawn broke, Amina had covered miles through the dense forest, guided only by instinct and the distant promise of open land beyond the trees. Her body ached, her limbs shook, and yet her spirit remained unbroken. Each step forward was a testament to a mother's love and the fierce determination to protect the fragile life she carried. With the horizon finally widening into rolling plains, she allowed herself a cautious hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were moving toward safety, toward a future where the child's cries would be met with warmth and kindness instead of anger and cruelty. By mid-morning, Amina had stumbled into the outskirts of a small frontier town. The sun was high, beating down on her tired body, and the long trek through forests and plains had left her aching and barely able to hold the baby without trembling. She paused near a dusty road, hoping to catch her breath. But the emptiness of the town square offered no comfort, only the harsh realization that she was still alone. Vulnerable and exposed. It was then that she heard the sound of boots on gravel, a deliberate, measured pace that carried authority. A man appeared at the edge of the road, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered coat and hat shadowing his face. There was something commanding in his presence, yet not menacing, more like the steady calm of someone who had seen much suffering and learned to bear it with quiet strength. The man approached cautiously, but with purpose, and as he drew near, Amina instinctively hugged her baby closer, shielding her with her body. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice trembling from exhaustion and fear. She had learned to distrust strangers, to assume danger in every interaction, and even now, her muscles tensed in preparation for flight. "I mean you no harm," the man said gently, tipping his hat back to reveal kind, weary eyes. "You're hurt, and that baby, she needs care." His voice carried authority, but also empathy, and something deep inside Amina recognized it. She relaxed slightly, though just enough to catch her balance. "My name's Elias," he continued, kneeling slowly to meet her gaze without looming over her. "I'm the sheriff here. I can help you, if you let me." His words were simple, yet offered a lifeline that Amina hadn't dared to hope for. She studied him carefully. The lines of his face suggested experience, compassion, and a quiet resolve. In a world that had been nothing but cruel to her, he seemed almost like an anchor, a chance to finally breathe. Tears threatened to spill over, fatigue and relief mingling in a torrent of emotion. Amina's voice caught as she replied, I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore." She shifted the baby in her arms, protective and fearful, the tiny face peeking out to blink at the stranger. "You've been through much," Elias said softly, not pressing but holding space for her fear. "But I won't let anyone hurt you or her. You don't have to face this alone anymore." There was no condescension, no judgment, only quiet conviction and a promise that felt real in a way she hadn't felt in years. After a long, tense pause, Amina nodded slightly, the weight of her past urging caution, but her maternal instinct guiding her to a glimmer of hope. Slowly, almost tentatively, she allowed Elias to help her to his horse, ensuring the baby remained safe against her chest as they rode toward his home. The first real feeling of safety in weeks began to wash over her. For the first time since leaving her village, Amina allowed herself to hope that someone truly cared, that someone could offer her and her daughter a chance to heal. Elias rode beside her, not as a stranger, but as a protector, a man who had faced loss and hardship himself and understood the quiet bravery it took to survive. For Amina, the journey had shifted from mere survival to something more profound. With the sheriff's guidance, she began to imagine a future where the cries of her daughter could be met with love, where she might regain strength and perhaps in time, even trust again. Elias's home stood at the edge of the town, a modest wooden house with a sturdy stone chimney and a small fenced yard. It was simple, but to Amina, it felt like a fortress, a sanctuary where the chaos and cruelty of the village could not reach her. As they approached, the baby stirred in her arms, her tiny cries echoing softly in the quiet morning. Amina's heart clenched. Every sound felt fragile, every moment precious. Elias helped her dismount, guiding her gently toward the door. "Come inside," he said, his tone steady and calm. "You both need rest, food, and warmth. No one will harm you here." His words carried a weight of sincerity that Amina hadn't encountered in months, a promise rooted not in obligation, but in genuine care. Once inside, the warm scent of wood smoke and stew filled the air. The interior was humble, yet orderly, with a small fireplace, a wooden table, and shelves lined with neatly stacked supplies. Elias gestured for her to sit while he prepared a clean blanket and warm water for her and the baby. Amina hesitated, still wary, but exhaustion and the lure of safety outweighed her fear. She sank into a chair, cradling the baby, as the warmth of the room began to seep into her chilled bones. Elias worked silently but efficiently, cleaning Amina's minor wounds and offering food and water. "Eat," he said, placing a small plate before her. "You need strength to care for her." His eyes held a gentle patience, never pressuring her, simply offering what she desperately needed. Slowly, Amina took a tentative bite, her hands trembling. The taste of nourishment mingled with the bittersweet relief that someone was truly helping her. The baby, sensing her mother's cautious calm, quieted in her arms. Amina's fingers traced the tiny features, marveling at the softness of her daughter's skin and the delicate curve of her tiny hands. The reality of their survival, the first sense of safety in weeks, began to sink in. She whispered softly to the infant, a promise carried in the sound of her own voice. "We're safe now, little one. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Elias observed quietly, giving her space but remaining nearby. "You've endured a lot," he said softly. "But here, you can heal. And when you're ready, you can start building a life for yourself and her." His words were not only comforting, they were empowering. For the first time since leaving her village, Amina felt the possibility of hope. The day passed slowly, filled with small, careful acts of care. Elias showed her where to rest, how to keep the baby warm, and ensured she had everything she needed. The simplicity of these moments, the warmth of the fire, the soft kiss of her daughter, the quiet kindness of a stranger felt revolutionary after so much hardship. Amina's heart, bruised but resilient, began to trust in the quiet constancy of Cerdot as night fell. The shadows of the past still lingered, but they were tempered by the light of her newfound safety. Amina wrapped the baby in a clean blanket, holding her close, and allowed herself to breathe. For the first time, she imagined a future not dominated by fear, but by the possibility of healing Dot in that small wooden house. With the crackling fire and the quiet presence of the sheriff, Amina took her first real steps toward reclaiming her life. Though the road ahead was uncertain, she now had a protector, a place of refuge, and the strength that comes from knowing her daughter would no longer face the world alone. Days passed slowly in Elias's modest home, each one a small step toward recovery for Amina and her daughter. The bruises on her arms and face were fading, replaced by the tender ache of muscles stiffened from weeks of pain and fear. Each morning, sunlight streamed through the small windows, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor, and each night, the crackling fire offered a quiet comfort that had been missing from her life for far too long. Amina had learned the rhythm of this new life, feeding her baby, cleaning, resting, and gradually regaining her strength. The simplest things, a warm meal, a soft bed, a quiet conversation, felt like luxuries. And yet, despite the safety, a lingering weariness remained. She had been betrayed before, hurt by those she should have been able to trust. Opening her heart again seemed nearly impossible. Elias sensed her hesitation but never forced it. Instead, he offered small gestures of care, patient and consistent. He would bring fresh water, tend the fire, or quietly sit nearby while Amina rocked the baby to sleep. Sometimes he shared stories of his late wife, of the life he had once known, and of the quiet loneliness that remained after her passing. These stories, told with gentle honesty, created a bridge between them, a shared understanding of loss, pain, and endurance. One afternoon, as Amina bathed her daughter in a small basin by the window, Elias watched quietly, giving her space. "You're stronger than you realize," he said softly, not as a judgment, but as an observation. "It takes courage to survive what you've survived and still care for someone else." His words startled her, not because they were harsh, but because they carried no pity. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, truly seen, for who she was rather than for what she had endured. Slowly, Amina began to speak, her voice trembling but resolute. She told Elias about the village, the beating, the harsh traditions, and the fear that had driven her to flee. She spoke of her husband's anger, the judgmental eyes of the villagers, and the desperate hope that she and her daughter might one day find safety. As she spoke, the weight of her secrets and fear began to lift slightly, replaced by the fragile relief that someone listened without condemning her. Elias never interrupted, never offered easy solutions, simply allowed her to speak. When she paused, exhausted by the flood of emotion, he nodded gently and said, "You did the right thing by leaving. You're not alone anymore. I won't let anyone harm you or her." His words were simple, yet carried the weight of a promise grounded not in words alone but in action. In the safety he had already provided Dot by the end of that day, a subtle shift had occurred. Amina's shoulders were less tense, her eyes held a glimmer of trust, and the quiet bond between her and Elias began to solidify. She realized that perhaps not all strangers were dangerous, and not all men carried cruelty in their hearts. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could be cared for, even supported. While still retaining her independence and strength. As night fell and the fire crackled softly, Amina rocked her daughter to sleep and looked at Elias, who was tending to chores quietly. A tentative sense of hope blossomed inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something that could grow into trust, safety, and even companionship, a new chapter in a life that had known far too much pain. Weeks of fragile peace passed in Elias's home, the kind of days that were measured by the rising sun, the baby's coos, and the slow healing of Amina's bruised body and spirit. But the past has a stubborn way of catching up, and one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, a messenger arrived in town carrying news that shattered the calm. The village had learned of Amina's whereabouts. Relatives and townspeople, enraged that she had fled with the baby, were heading toward the town, demanding that she be returned. Amina felt a chill crawl over her skin. The thought of facing Farid or the villagers again filled her with panic. Her hands trembled as she clutched her daughter, instinctively pulling her closer. "They'll take her from me," she whispered, fear threading her voice. "I can't let them." Her words broke off, swallowed by dread and exhaustion. Elias listened quietly, his jaw tight but his eyes calm. He had anticipated the danger news of runaway villagers, traveled fast, but seeing the fear in Amina's eyes ignited a protective fire he had not felt in years. "You won't face them alone," he said firmly. "I'll make sure no one lays a hand on you or your daughter." His voice carried the authority of a man who had confronted lawlessness before and survived. The night that followed was tense. Elias prepared his modest home for a potential confrontation, reinforcing doors and windows, while Amina sat by the fire, rocking the baby, her mind a whirlwind of anxiety and guilt. "I brought this danger here," she murmured. "You don't have to protect me." "You have nothing to apologize for," Elias replied. "You were fleeing for your life. You did what anyone would do to protect a child. This is on them, not you." His words steadied her, though only slightly. Trusting him fully would take more than words. It would take action. By morning, the threat arrived. A group of men, some carrying farming tools, others with cruel expressions and angry voices, approached Elias's home, shouting her name and demanding the child. Amina's heart pounded, terror gripping her like a vice. But she stood firm behind Elias. "You will not touch her," Elias called out, stepping forward. His presence was commanding, and there was no hesitation in his stance. "This child is under my protection. Leave now, or face the consequences." The villagers hesitated, not used to someone standing against them so boldly, especially a lone sheriff. Amina felt a surge of gratitude and newfound courage. For the first time, she realized that she did not have to cower or beg. She had an ally, a protector who believed in justice as fiercely as she wanted safety. Some of the men muttered and debated retreating, while others scowled, unwilling to admit defeat. But Elias did not waver. His steady, unwavering stance, combined with the moral weight he carried as law and protector, finally broke their resolve. One by one, the villagers retreated, casting angry glances but leaving the mother and child unharmed. Amina sank to the ground, tears of relief spilling over as she held her daughter close. For the first time, she felt that she and her child truly had a defender. Elias knelt beside her, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They're gone," he said softly. "You're safe here. We'll make sure it stays that way." That day marked a turning point. The threat from her past had been faced, and Amina realized that survival was not only possible, but also accompanied by courage, allies, and hope. Her trust in Elias grew deeper, not blind, but earned through action and unwavering protection. After the confrontation with the villagers, life settled into a rhythm at Elias's home, one marked by small victories and quiet rebuilding. The shadow of fear that had plagued Amina began to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of stability. She no longer woke in the night imagining hands reaching for her daughter. The walls that once felt confining now felt protective. Amina began to participate more in daily life, helping with chores around the house. She cleaned the modest rooms, tended to the small garden outside, and prepared meals, rediscovering the confidence and competence that had been stripped from her by months of fear and abuse. Each task completed was a small triumph, a reclamation of control over her life. Elias watched her quietly, admiring her resilience and determination without imposing his own will. Their bond deepened in these ordinary moments. Morning light streamed through the windows as Amina hummed softly while preparing food, the baby cooing in her arms. Elias would sometimes join her, offering gentle guidance or sharing the work, creating an unspoken partnership that neither had expected but both appreciated. There was no rush, no pressure, only the gradual weaving of trust and mutual respect. Evenings were quieter, often spent by the fire. Elias shared stories of his late wife, not as a burden but as a way of opening a window into his own grief and loneliness. Amina listened, sometimes responding with her own fragmented memories, slowly revealing the person she was beyond the bruises and trauma. These exchanges were subtle, tender, and transformative, knitting together two wounded souls who had found solace in each other's presence. The baby became the center of this new life. The bond between mother and daughter visible in every gesture, and Elias, too, grew attached. He would gently rock the infant when Amina needed rest, speaking softly to her as if the baby could understand every word. The presence of this tiny life reminded them both of the fragility and beauty of survival and the need to nurture it carefully. With time, the house began to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. Amina added small touches: folded blankets, a washed and mended dress for the baby, a few potted herbs by the windowsill. Each contribution was a declaration. She was here to stay, not as a guest, but as someone building a life. Elias, in turn, welcomed her efforts, understanding that allowing her to reclaim agency was part of her healing. Trust, once tentative, became a foundation for companionship. Amina learned to confide in Elias about her fears, while he, in turn, shared his own vulnerabilities. Their conversations, often quiet and unhurried, fostered a growing sense of partnership. He did not impose authority. She did not demand protection. Instead, they found a balance, a rhythm of coexistence that was both comforting and empowering. By the end of the chapter, Amina realized something profound. Safety alone was not enough. She needed belonging, purpose, and the ability to shape her own life. Here, in the modest house at the edge of town, she found the first hints of all three. And in Elias's steady presence, she discovered that trust, once earned, could become the bedrock of something far more enduring than mere survival. The days passed in a quiet, comforting rhythm, but beneath the surface, something deeper was beginning to bloom between Amina and Elias. It was subtle at first, a shared glance, a pause in conversation, a small gesture of care that lingered longer than necessary. The presence of the baby, innocent and dependent, drew them together. But the bond forming between the two adults was unmistakable. Amina noticed it in the way Elias would quietly check on her when she was asleep, his expression softening when he saw her exhausted but determined. She felt it in the gentleness with which he handled the baby, always careful, always protective, yet never overbearing. It was a tenderness that seemed to extend not just to the child but to her as well. A quiet acknowledgment of her strength and resilience. Elias, on his part, found himself drawn to Amina in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her courage, the way she carried herself despite weeks of trauma, captivated him. Her laughter, rare and fleeting, lit up the modest home like sunlight breaking through clouds. He admired her for her determination to rebuild a life in the face of such adversity, and he felt a stirring in his chest that he had thought lost with his wife's passing. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, the baby asleep in Amina's arms, Elias spoke softly. "You've changed this place," he said, his eyes tracing the little additions she had made: the potted herbs, the folded blankets, the careful mending of the baby's clothes. "It's brighter, warmer. Somehow yours." Amina looked down, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "I just wanted to help," she replied quietly, but there was a note of pride in her voice. She realized, with a little startle, that she valued his approval, his recognition not as a man imposing authority, but as someone whose respect mattered. Over the following days, their interactions carried a new layer of intimacy. Elias would linger a moment longer when handing her a warm bowl of food, offering a reassuring smile that seemed to reach beyond politeness. Amina, in turn, found herself seeking his presence, her words softening when he was near, her laughter a little easier, her trust deeper. It was in small, ordinary acts that their feelings grew. Sharing chores, preparing meals, tending the baby together, each moment became a quiet declaration of mutual reliance and admiration. Yet neither dared to speak of it outright. Both understood the fragility of their circumstances. The bond was precious and unspoken, growing stronger through presence and consistency rather than declarations. Late one night, Amina sat by the window, gazing at the stars. She felt Elias's quiet presence behind her, his hand brushing against hers in the dark. Neither spoke, but the connection was electric, a mutual acknowledgment of feelings both were hesitant to name. It was safe, it was tender, and it was theirs. By the end of this chapter, the emotional landscape of Elias's home had shifted. Safety and trust had been established, but now something more profound was taking root, an affection tempered by respect, shared hardship, and the small daily acts of care that bound them together. It was the beginning of love, fragile yet undeniable, growing quietly in the warmth of their shared home and the gentle rhythm of their lives. The peace that Amina and Elias had built was threatened once again, but this time the danger was different. Word had traveled faster than expected, and a small group of her husband's relatives arrived at the town's edge, determined to reclaim the baby. They were brash and angry, some carrying makeshift weapons, their eyes hard with entitlement and cruelty. The past that Amina had tried to leave behind had finally caught up with her. Amina's heart raced as she clutched her daughter tightly, the tiny body warm against her chest. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she drew a steadying breath. She was no longer the woman who had fled the village trembling and alone. She had survived, healed, and learned strength in the quiet care of Elias, and she would not allow anyone to take her child. Elias stepped forward first, his presence commanding and unyielding. "Step back," he warned, his voice firm. "You will not lay a hand on her. This child is safe under my protection." There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in his tone, only authority and conviction. The relatives sneered, mocking his words, but Elias did not waver. Amina, feeling a surge of courage, stood beside him. She held her baby high, her voice trembling but strong. "She is my daughter," she cried. "You have no right. Leave now, or face me as well." For the first time, Amina confronted the men not as a victim but as a mother and protector. Her words carried the weight of everything she had endured, every night spent fleeing, every bruise that had healed, every act of courage that had brought her here. There was a fire in her eyes, a fierce love that no one could extinguish. The tension hung thick in the air. The relatives hesitated, caught off guard by the determination in Amina's stance and the unwavering support of Elias beside her. Some muttered to one another, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Elias did not lower his gaze, his hand resting near his belt, prepared to defend them if necessary, yet calm enough to show he was in control. Finally, after a long, silent standoff, the relatives turned and left, grumbling and casting resentful glances back. They had underestimated the bond between mother and protector, the courage born of love and resilience. Amina sank to the ground, tears flowing freely as she hugged her daughter, relief washing over her like a warm tide. Elias knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were incredible," he said softly. "You stood for her, for both of you. And you were never alone. I was right here." Amina looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude and something more, a recognition of the man who had become her anchor, her protector, and perhaps in time, something even closer to her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the baby's soft breathing. "For everything." The confrontation left them both changed. Amina's confidence had grown, tempered by the knowledge that she could stand up to fear and danger. Elias's admiration for her courage deepened, not just for her resilience, but for the fierce, protective love she carried for her child. Together, they had faced the shadows of her past and emerged stronger, united by trust, respect, and the undeniable bond forged in survival and shared struggle. The day ended with quiet calm, the kind that comes after a storm. Amina held her daughter, feeling the steady, reassuring presence of Elias nearby. For the first time, she truly believed that she and her child could live without fear, that their lives, once fragile and vulnerable, now had the promise of safety, love, and a future built on courage and hope. With the threat of her past finally behind them, life in Elias's modest home settled into a rhythm of peace and quiet joy. The days were measured not by fear or survival, but by small moments of tenderness and ordinary happiness. Amina, once bruised and wary, now moved through her home with confidence and purpose, tending to her daughter, managing chores, and slowly building a life that felt entirely her own. The baby thrived in this newfound stability, her laughter and coos filling the once quiet house with warmth. Each smile and tiny hand clutch reminded Amina of the strength that had carried them through the darkest days. Holding her child close, she felt a sense of completion she had never known, a love that was fierce, protective, and unconditional. Elias watched the household grow in life and warmth, finding his own heart slowly opening in ways he had not anticipated. Caring for the child and supporting Amina had brought him a renewed sense of purpose, and the bond between them deepened with each passing day. Their relationship, rooted in trust, respect, and shared hardships, blossomed naturally without rush or expectation. Small gestures, a hand offered while crossing the yard, a gentle smile across the kitchen table, a quiet word of encouragement spoke volumes of affection that neither had dared to voice outright at first. Over time, the modest home became a sanctuary not just of safety, but of love. Amina began planting flowers and herbs around the house, giving the place color and life, while Elias repaired worn furniture and built small toys for the baby. Their combined efforts transformed the space into a true home, filled with laughter, warmth, and the soft rhythm of daily life. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, Amina sat on the porch with her daughter nestled against her. Elias joined them quietly, offering a comforting presence without words. The baby's tiny fingers grasped Amina's hand, and in that simple connection, Amina felt the culmination of all her struggles, the knowledge that they were safe, loved, and together. Amina finally allowed herself to dream of the future. She imagined her daughter growing up in a home where she was cherished, where her choices mattered, and where fear and cruelty were replaced by love and protection. She thought of Elias, steady and kind, a man who had taught her the meaning of trust and partnership, and felt gratitude and something deeper bloom quietly in her heart. Life was not without challenges. The past could never be fully erased, and new trials would inevitably come. But Amina no longer faced them alone. She had a protector, a partner, and a home. And most importantly, she had her daughter, safe and thriving, a living testament to her courage and resilience. The story closed with a sense of enduring hope. Amina, Elias, and the baby were no longer bound by fear or oppression. They were bound by love, trust, and the promise of a future they could shape together. In the quiet of the evening, with the warm glow of the fire inside and the vast sky above, Amina finally felt it, a life rebuilt, a family forged from survival, and the freedom to embrace happiness without hesitation. For the first time in years, she smiled not out of relief or necessity, but because her heart was full and it was free.